We're live on YouTube and UGTV.
I'm waiting for the announcement that this is being recorded.
Yes, we're live.
That's what I was waiting for. She has the last word. Okay, good evening. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that due to COVID-19, we are attending remotely. All participants should mute their phones when not speaking to avoid background noise. And during the meeting, please make sure that you announce
Mayor,
yourself.
we can't hear.
Okay. You cannot hear me?
Mayor, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
I think you're on, Mayor.
Okay. Okay, during the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak, so the public that is participating knows who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and its current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General. I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, has been called to be conducted virtually on Thursday, September 30th, 2021 at 5:00 p.m. for an ARPA workshop. Roll call: Ramirez,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Kane,
Here.
Markley,
Here.
Walters,
Here.
Philbrook,
Here.
Bynum,
Here.
Burrough,
Here.
Townsend,
Here.
McKiernan,
Here.
Alvey.
Here. Thank you. So as announced, we are here for an American Rescue Plan Act, Recovery Act workshop. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Bach, County Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor, Commission, members of the public, Doug Bach, County Administrator. It is a pleasure this evening to jump into a topic that I know we've been anxiously awaiting to get into in more detail for some time. You know, earlier in the year, we worked through some sessions to allocate immediate needs from our ARPA funding to get those in a position to go to use in the community where we needed to spend money to take care of things through the end of this year. However, there still is a fairly good pot of money that's left out there for us to work through and to prioritize. So what we've designed tonight is a workshop for you all to be able to discuss what you think your higher priorities are for this to go. And the intent of tonight's workshop is not to dig into how much money we want to spend in each area, but really to define what are the higher priorities of where we want to go, where you see those. I mean, there are certain things out there like, I'll take our health department for operations. You know, as we went through and we identified some immediate needs, we know the pandemic's not over. So this is something we're going to have to either we make a decision, do we plan to put money to help expend that over the next year or such from ARPA money? Are we planning to fund that from regular tax dollars in future times, or we think we're good and we're not really looking at that as higher priority from what we need to do for the pandemic? And I don't really anticipate that's the answer, but I just use that as an example of one that's an operational thing that we haven't dug into much. But then there are many other things as far as community needs that ARPA money is eligible to go into, and that I think there's a lot of different feelings from the governing body. So our intention tonight is to work through that, get a lot of good feedback, and I think we'll probably have some good staff assignments coming out of this to take it forward from here. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Ashley Hand, our Director of Strategic Communication, who's going to help us work through this process tonight and be our guide. So Ashley, take it away.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I really look forward to this conversation this evening. And as Doug Bach mentioned, I am Ashley Hand. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications for the Unified Government. And what we want to do today is really focus on kind of what the North Stars are for us as a community, based on your understanding of the needs of your constituents and the community at large, as you are often interacting with our community in many different forums. And we recognize that you bring considerable perspective to the kind of needs and challenges facing us and directly related to the pandemic, but also as they align to your commission priorities as a governing body. So really, I want to kind of focus in on what I would consider the North Stars. So really about clarifying these priorities, help guide the conversation that we hope to continue with our community stakeholders. You know, there are a lot of issues that we could potentially tackle as a community, and it can be difficult to engage on specific areas of focus if we don't have some direction from you. So we're really excited that this will just be a very important step in moving forward to identify that shared values and vision, as well as key goals, measurable goals that we can use to move forward to identify the right types of strategies, the type of partnerships, and as Doug mentioned, the prioritization of how we allocate funding. We have to recognize that ARPA is one of many potential tools to help us realize that vision, as we had the infrastructure bill being brought forward today at the federal level, as there are other grants and priorities that are coming forward from this current federal administration. But certainly, you know, many of these efforts will take consecutive years of investment and effort on our part as a community to realize. So really wanting to hear from you, how do we pivot now so that the normal we resume post-pandemic is better than ever for all members of our community? So what we want to do is start with kind of talking about your values and vision for what does it look like post-pandemic. Recognizing that it's important to be ambitious. We don't want to be limited by today's constraints. We also can weave in these other ways of delivering on these goals. So it's important to kind of be creative, be ambitious, and be bold as we move forward in this conversation this evening. Now, several of you were able to provide me with some advanced information to help me kind of understand where you're coming from. And from that input, I kind of gleaned a few key values. But what I'd like to do is turn it over to you to help answer the first question of how would you describe a post-pandemic Wyandotte County? What is different? What have we learned? And what does it look like? I'm going to just go with the names that I see first. Commissioner Markley, you raised your hand.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm sorry, I didn't get you my information in advance,
Okay.
but I did have it in front of me.
Excellent. Not a requirement. It was just a suggested reading.
I think the word bold that's already in there is really key to me. I'd really like to see us be an example of a modernized city and take approaches that are really different and kind of put ourselves out in front of what the trends are. You know, we've seen a huge cultural shift as a result of COVID. I think some things will go back to the old normal, but I think many things are not going to. And I think we can make tiny changes to try to adjust the old way we do things to the new ways of the world. But I would rather see us look at everything we're doing and say, how do we become part of this new world instead of just adjusting the old way just enough to make it fit? So I'm really looking for us to be bold and get out in front of it and say, how do we embrace this change instead of just sort of, well, we could make a little change here and a little tweak there, and we could sort of put the square peg into the round hole. So that's what I see for our post-pandemic world, and that's what I'm hoping we'll be able to do as a commission.
And Commissioner, can I just dig a little bit into what do you think we should bring forward from the past kind of pre-pandemic times that you think is valuable to our community?
Good question. I mean, we're still going to have the same problems, you know. we're still facing the same infrastructure issues. We're still facing the same blight issues, and we have some programs that we have worked on in the past that are still good, and we're going to take those things forward with us. But I think even those, I think we're going to look at different ways of communicating. We learned during COVID a lot about how to communicate with our public when we can't see them in person. And I think those things are going to continue into the future because people have just become more accustomed to them. So I think even the things that we have been doing and feel like we've been doing well, like the SOAR program stuff, for instance, we're still going to see changes to those programs because there are going to be changes in how we communicate. And there may be changes in sort of what the end goal of the program is or where we want to go in terms of our overall infrastructure as well. So I think there are things that are going to stay the same. Of course there are, but I also think even our sort of typical services are going to see a continued change as a result of the cultural shift.
Excellent. Commissioner McKiernan, you're next to raise your hand.
And I have no idea whatsoever if what I've done, well, I know it doesn't match because you could write doesn't follow the instructions on this, or you could hear Fleetwood Mac's go your own way. But I've identified three things that I think we could and should use ARPA funds for. And if you'll indulge me, I'll just read these three things and my rationale to the group. First of all, improved pandemic response. Given that local governments across the country were challenged to respond to COVID-19 in a timely and effective manner, and given that epidemiologists and medical researchers around the world are unanimous in their assessment that it's not a question of if there will be another pandemic, but rather when there will be another pandemic, then I believe the unified government should use ARPA dollars to build a more robust response capability so that we are able to minimize the negative effects of the next pandemic on our community. This response capability would include both equipment and supplies, as well as procedures and action checklists so that we can quickly take effective action. That's number one. Number two, given that COVID-19 pandemic put an economic strain on many members of our community, especially those members of our community who had very little in the way of financial safety net, and given that the number of homeless individuals in our community rose during the COVID-19 pandemic, then I believe that the unified government should use ARPA dollars to build a more robust ability to respond to the myriad issues of homelessness. This enhanced response capability would include both aid for individuals and families, as well as an increase in the availability of affordable housing. And now to get my last verse of Fleetwood Mac, go your own way. Number three, given that the management of both stormwater and wastewater from residential and non-residential properties can have a direct effect on both quality of life and the personal health of Wyandotte County residents, and given the fact that the stormwater and wastewater management infrastructure in Wyandotte County is in serious need of improvement to meet those quality of life and personal health needs, then I believe the unified government should use ARPA dollars to maximize our ability to improve stormwater infrastructure, while at the same time minimizing the costs that would be borne by individual property owners, both residential and non-residential, for that improvement. So there you go, Fleetwood Mac.
Excellent. Well, and Commissioner, when I read your let's call it special credit response to the worksheet, I kind of extracted kind of this idea of, and values around resilience and being prepared for our future, affordability for our residents, as well as being proactive, which has a lot to do with being resilient, but also recognizing that it is about readiness. And really that was something that kind of really came through in the comments that you had provided. So I kind of extracted that as kind of initial values. And
I will go along with that.
All right, excellent, excellent. Well, that's a good thing. Mayor Alvey, you were next with your hand raised.
Thank you. I think when I try to see beyond, whether there is another pandemic or not, I think we have to look at this funding kind of as a once in a lifetime opportunity to move us forward. And so I would recommend that we have so many infrastructure needs. I would like to see us get a jump start on some of those. We know we're not funding up our infrastructure nearly to the level it needs to be. And we want to maintain, not too burdened with taxes to have the revenues to really make some progress in this backlog of infrastructure, I would think we should put some money, quite a bit of money into the infrastructure. And I think part of that is investment in neighborhood development. Especially we've seen some parts of the community that are really starting to pick up. I think especially in the Northeast area, but also the area through between State and Central, as well as Rosedale, Argentine. There are certain areas where we're already starting to see some good uptake in economic development. I think we would want to enhance that with some infrastructure improvements to improve the look and the feel and how things work for our community. I think those dollars could be targeted to specific nodes and just to enhance the development that is already tending there. I think it would include putting some more money into our parks. We've had the Parks Master Plan in place for several years, but we know we can't fund it to the level it really needs to be funded. But again, I think those, as we look at perhaps, not, maybe releasing some of that parkland somehow because of the sheer number we have and the fact we cannot maintain those, that we would then be able to concentrate our resources on park and park amenities. If you look at, see what happened around Waterway Park, right? That was a tremendous enhancement for that area that really then sustained and supported the economic development that happened there. I could see the same thing happening at Rosedale Park. There are lots of places where we can do this and really enhance the development going on there. I also very sensitive to for the affordable housing, and but as part of the economic development, some of our dollars would be targeted to support those who would like to come in and build housing that would be more affordable. Because again, bringing more people in, giving them an opportunity to build wealth, and that helps build sustainable neighborhoods. But again, with our infrastructure being where it is, I would not want the ARPA dollars to replace the change in fees that we had to sustain the priorities for our stormwater, but to actually maybe, instead of just getting 2 or 3 or 4 projects done, we're able to go out and do number 5, 6, 7, or whatever that might be. Not to replace, but really to get a jump start on some of these infrastructure needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner Ramirez.
Thank you, Ashley. I'll try to keep my comments very succinct as possible.
That's okay.
I think, looking into a future post-pandemic Wyandotte, I think the biggest 2 values, things that I see that we can continue to work on, one is increased accessibility. We saw, especially during last year, when our health department was trying to get information out, ensuring not just our health department information, but all of our governmental services are being accessible by all people who speak many languages. I learned just yesterday, there's in our school district, many languages are spoken in our school district. But when you look at our information given to the public, it's all in one language. And so we need to make sure that we increase that accessibility for everybody, especially during a health pandemic like this. We need to make sure that we're giving out information to those who don't speak English. And so, and the other thing is continuing to strive for openness and transparency with our community, because that is something that they cherish. So I think post-pandemic, those 2 values are what I think are going to be what I believe are important. And going off of what Commissioner McKiernan, talking about our homeless residents, because they are still residents of this county, they're still citizens of Wyandotte County and KCK. And it's not, yes, we need to do for homeless, but also housing and security as a whole. Have people waiting in the shadows for this mass eviction to happen. and trying to help them. And we have increasing housing costs. And so altogether, just fixing our housing insecurity as a whole in Wyandotte County. And to go in hand with that, you need housing, but also you need good, healthy people funding our CHIP program that we have created. And I know that's something that Julianne has been looking into, as us getting back into. And I think that's very important, because we can have all of this development, we can have all this housing, all these amenities, but if we don't have, as I keep saying, happy, healthy people, then what is it all for? And that's why we need to take care of our housing security and our health insecurity as well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bynum, you were next, and you also presented several ideas, which I tried to capture some of the values that I heard from you in blue, but I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I do think I wanted to say that I shipped these couple of questions out to other people, constituents of mine, to get a little bit of feedback about what other people might be thinking. And it was interesting that they basically were thinking what I was thinking. So I'll just share some thoughts I jotted down. The pandemic really has shed a light on our quality of life issues, as several have said already. And, you know, some of our residents specifically, I think, were impacted. Our older adults, our unhoused, our low income, our communities of color. We've made a lot of really great efforts and had a lot of successes over the years to improve quality of life for our residents. But the pandemic has, you know, taken us backwards to a degree. So it's a real opportunity to work with the community again. We've done it so many times before, and problem solve together, create solutions together, and provide UG services that fit the needs of the community. We've been reminded during the pandemic so amazingly over and over again of the generosity of our community and the willingness that they showed to pitch in and help each other. We've learned we can do better at working with our community and not just for them. So, you know, things that have come up are affordable housing, senior housing, the fact that there's limited housing for aging in place, and we don't have enough landlords who will take a housing voucher. Obviously, staff are working extremely hard and spread very thin. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. And I would just say, kind of my post-pandemic WICO, we've learned how to close gaps in providing healthcare access to all our residents and be equitable about it. And our neighbors are helping each other beyond their own block to assist with information sharing. Maybe they're providing transportation and helping ensure access to healthcare. Secondarily, our post-pandemic WICO has taken the brave, bold step to come forward and fund and implement a systemic change in how we treat our homeless population. And we will work with our nonprofit partners, and we will build a lasting structure for how to help and house those who've struggled. And finally, our post-pandemic WICO will boldly take on our serious infrastructure deficits, create an equitable funding mechanism for stormwater mitigation, and take a big step forward by allocating significant ARPA resources to our most pressing stormwater. And I'll stop for there. I've got a lot to say, but that's good for now. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Commissioner Townsend, you had your hand up next.
Thank you, Gayle Townsend, Commissioner District 1. Good evening. I'm not going to take a lot of time because I agree so much with what my fellow commissioners have said already with regard to homelessness, with regard to the ability, the desire to use some of these funds, ARPA funds, to correct major infrastructure problems, particularly sidewalks in areas that I represent, but the stormwater, wastewater, so key to, as Commissioner McKiernan mentioned, the health and safety and protection of property for our constituents. But I see these funds as an opportunity to say yes to our constituents where we couldn't say it in, as I recall, some of the Cvbg funding requests. So specifically, post-pandemic, we're post 9/11, people still need to eat. So there is still a fervent desire for additional grocery store accommodations in the northeast part of the city. And particularly, we've got a group involved in trying to establish one in the 18th and Quindaro area. Still waiting to hear more specifics, but there is an uncontested need in that area to have more access to fresh vegetables, fresh meats from a full service grocery store. So I see these ARPA funds as an opportunity to say yes and to help fund projects like this. Now, just so you know, those listening are clear, this is a different project than, say, the grocery store at 6th and State, which the UG undertook. Nevertheless, that does not mean, hopefully, we can't be supportive of it with this opportunity. So I say, you know, this would be an opportunity to say yes to a project like that. Again, it's already been mentioned by some of my colleagues and by constituents who weighed in again earlier this summer during the Cvbg workshop about expenditures in parks. Particularly, there's a project I'd like to see undertaken at the request of any number of residents in the Quindaro Park area. We were able to put in a new ball field, but it was called to my attention that as you enter that park from the western border, you have to go almost half the length of the Chiefs football field over grass before you even reach the shelter house. So there needs to be accessibility through a paved road that would get you from the western border of that park to the shelter house. And then to the east of that same shelter house, the sidewalks that are there, the paths that are there, need to be redone or capped. Similarly to the project that was undertaken earlier with COVID funds for Jersey Creek, and how much of an improvement was made to that from those funds. So post-pandemic, and God help us to get to that point, I see this as an opportunity to say yes to a lot of these projects that we couldn't before, haven't before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Philbrook.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent.
All of that. And so for me, looking at it from a 40,000 feet view, what I see is a housing system in our community that addresses all tiers of housing, no matter whether it is folks that can afford a $300,000, $400,000 house or more, and a person who can afford or learn to afford a $50,000 house, a place to start. Don't ask me where one of those is. You'd have to do a whole lot of work on it. But the point being is that we as a community really have not we've looked in, what pockets, we've kind of picked pockets to work in areas and improve those. But as an overall look at what our housing looks like, we have been kind of disjointed and disconnected. And it would really be nice to put together a whole program and planning on how to create these houses of different tier levels, and for one-person homes, or a small home with one parent and a few kids, or a retired couple. So we have a lot of needs in our county for different types of housing.
Absolutely.
And so that big housing system, which then would allow us to be very collaborative right across the whole thing. And that's one of those bold things we talk about doing, being bold and collaborate and not worry about whether our name is the biggest name in the pot, if we're the most important one, or if we show up the most, because when we do that, then we lose sight of our goal of caring for our community. So that's part of it too. The equity part of it comes right in with the tiered housing.
Yeah.
Have to be equitable. Not everybody can afford the same kind of housing. So work on that too. So having that all together, I would tell you that wraps right into the housing situation for what we look at as homelessness right now, which is very, very dire right now.
Yes.
We're having trouble just renting rooms to put people in. There are not places to put people. And so, they're living in their cars right now. And that's not saying that we don't have organizations out there trying to find places to put them, because we do. It's just not being able to find the places to put them. We don't have it.
Yeah.
As an overall system for housing, I'm seeing tiered, like I said, tiered housing, and address homelessness and people that are not working up to their potential because they don't know they can. Okay. Create those wraparound services for job training, childcare, healthcare, early learning, and for early learning childhood, and substance abuse, along with post-incarcerated folks, just across the board, because we have a lot of folks that have those struggles and those issues. And we need a lot of that stuff, a lot of that wraparound stuff to get us in the right direction. So that would be a whole system that we could create and bring a collaborative group together to accomplish that, because we have a lot of smart people in our community that are already doing a lot of this work. But if we can just get them together and then get that impetus of some seed money to help create this program, then I think we could have that, and it could help us for a long time. I think this would just be the beginning of taking care of our community. Having said all of that, of course, there's roads, codes, and parks, just like everybody else. The frustration of people working very hard to take care of their property. And then what happens? The guy next door, everybody complains about him, and we try to do something about coding and nothing happens. So there's a lot of frustration in our community, and I don't know how to put the ARPA money toward that. I want somebody who deals with that all the time to figure that out. But I know that we need to deal with coding and inspection, all those sort of things. There's no question about that. And infrastructure, hey, I'm always there for infrastructure, because I don't want everything washing away. So there's a lot of areas that we can address, but the hard part is being smart about it and making sure that it's something that is a lasting effect, not just something that we do and then it doesn't work, maybe for 2 or 3 years. We need to work on stuff that will be lasting, that will be with us for a long time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Yep.
Commissioner Walters.
Yes, a couple things. I agree with most of the comments made, but we have some immediate needs that I think should be taken care of with ARPA funds. And some of those were pointed out recently on the infrastructure tour, bus tour we did. When streets wash out because of a failed culvert, they should be fixed. And I don't think we need to spend a long time thinking about that. And our solution of just closing the street and have it remain closed is not good. Though the streets that I'm thinking of that were closed, or one in the Rosedale area, one in the Piper area, those should have been in our 2021 amended budget. When people drive through our county and see roads closed because they're washed out, that's not the kind of livable county we want to have. So there are some immediate infrastructure things that should be taken care of immediately. But the other part of it, as Mayor Alvey said, is this is an opportunity, and we need to think about doing something transformational in our county. And we have these studies. We have the Armourdale study, the Central Avenue study, the Northeast study. We probably have more studies that we do. And I think we need to put our heads together and figure out better and more effective ways to implement those recommendations. If it means that we'll have a public-private partnership or more aggressive or a different recruitment strategy for investment, those are some of the things that we could look back at 10 years from now and say, this was really a significant change to our community. I think that's something we should give some thought to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Kane.
Thank you. I agree with Jim. You know, we drove around for 4 hours or whatever it was in a beat down bus. But the bridge, both bridges that he's talking about, the one out here is unsafe for the buses to go up it and get the kids and then bring them down. They bring them down on 123rd Street where the kids have to get on the bus there. And that's a pretty busy street. Mm-hmm. And I think staff's using the example, well, one of our staff members lives on that street, and if we're not fixing it, then, you know, well, look, he lives there and they're not fixing it. Those are things that we need to do to make sure our kids are safe. And it's frustrating that I don't think it would cost near as much as what they said it would cost to fix it. And that when we run into issues like this, we need to fix them right away, not say, well, doesn't look like we're ever going to fix them. And it's frustrating for me because my first thing is we're going to load kids at 123rd Street on the bus a couple of times a day. Well, if your kid was one of them, you know, 7, 8-year-old, how would you feel about it? And I think a lot of times what people have to do is put yourself in an unsafe condition or your family, and you might think differently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Does anybody else have any additional thoughts or want to weigh in? As I've been listening to you, I've been trying to kind of categorize. Oh, Commissioner Johnson, very nice to see you.
Hi, Ashley. I always like to hear what my colleagues have to say, but first of all, I think what your instructions that you gave us in question number 1 was that we would answer the question in 3 to 4 sentences, to which I don't think any of my colleagues have made any effort to stay within that construct, so neither will I.
All right.
Go for it.
Thank you, Mayor. I think my constituents would boldly say that the distribution of funds in a post-pandemic world needs to be equitable. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about equity as it relates to the distribution of funds, I'm speaking about how fairly income and opportunities are distributed between different groups within our community. I continue to say this, and I've said this since I come on this commission. We are a vastly diverse community, from the East End to the West End and from North to South. We don't really see that the kind of generational wealth per se in Wyandotte County, the likes of which we see in some of our neighboring communities. But we are good, hardworking people that have pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps, that believe in community, that believe in family. But we have not really seen what I consider to be an equitable distribution of wealth and opportunities throughout our community. What we have seen is that when people move from the have-nots to the haves, that they tend to flock to other areas of our community and or outside of our community. And so as we look at the distribution of funds and opportunities in a post-pandemic world in Wyandotte County, I think that we need to build within our culture a sense of equity in terms of how we distribute those funds, that we are always mindful, without having to be reminded, okay, that we need to be equitable to all portions of our community. I don't think we're going to become less diverse. We have always been a diverse community. And I think that we are always going to become not only as diverse as we are, but we're going to be even more diverse in the future. And so we have to be always mindful of how we continue to build wealth in all groups, regardless of your background, regardless of how long you've been here, regardless of your struggle, regardless of your family name, that we are figuring out ways that within our culture to be equitable to all portions, so that rising tide will lift all boats in Wyandotte County. I'm going to take this moment to put a period there. I'm not finished, but I'm trying to stay within your rules to the best of my ability.
Sentence one. Great.
That's right.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That was excellent. Does anyone else have anything else they would like? Commissioner Burrows, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm pleased to hear our commissioners express the needs and wants of our community. What I've had a chance to hear is the commonalities that we all share, that I would like to put forward, that we look at how we can utilize our dollars for the best return on investment. So I would encourage us to look at putting someone in charge of grants that would allow us to double and possibly triple our opportunities to address the programs that have been addressed here. The homelessness, mental health aspect, childcare for families that want to work but can't. We talked about transportation. I think one of the things we talked about was transparency and the equitable distribution of these dollars. It's one thing to have these dollars. It's another thing to stretch them beyond what their total values may be presently. And it doesn't mean that we hire more personnel, but what it could allow us to do in a short amount of time is apply for additional grants and utilize these dollars under those needs that we see within our community. I'm talking like we talked about the community development block grants. One of the things that we've heard in our community and infrastructure that I haven't heard here this evening is lighting up Wyandotte County. The systems that we have in place are street lights, the cost to redo those all across our county. This might be an opportunity to start some kind of an investment program to change our lights out to LED, low energy usage. It would fall under the green tax and the green usage for environmental. aspects, and at the same time provide a public safety aspect. So there's that return on investment. We're hitting not one issue, but multiple issues, and we're lighting up our community. The walkability to our community, the connectivity of one another to be able to, I heard Mr. Kane talk about the issues in his community's children. I don't have sidewalks over here where I live, and our roads are very narrow, and the children in the wintertime are standing on the side of the road. And Mayor Albee and I on the south side know how narrow these roads are from having been a township at one time. And it would be, when we talk about infrastructure, I can see many infrastructure needs, but who do we partner with to expand that out even more, to bring more money to the table? Post-pandemic, and I agree with Commissioner McKiernan in improving our health department facility and expand our mobile services. I think in our community of high health needs, that if we don't look at issues that allow us to start looking at a more healthy community, whether it be environmental, whether it be personal, whether it be walkability or outside activities, we're really shortchanging a tremendous opportunity here with our infrastructure. And I know we've talked about water and all of that, but I think of the day-to-day activities that Mr. Kane talked about, you know, the sidewalks and bike lanes and expanded what I would call corridors that connect with one another. So, but I think first and foremost, one of the things we really need to be mindful of is that we do have a tremendous amount of houselessness and homelessness now. And it's not going to get any better unless we have an opportunity in our community to share this very rare opportunity to invest in programs that allow us to tackle this thing head on. And we have to be prepared to do that. And we may swallow hard as to what the initial expense is, but just the return on that investment when you partner putting money forward on grants to address all of that. You've got veterans issues, you've got drug issues, you've got addiction issues, you've got single adult issues and educational issues, all tied up into one. We should have a one-stop facility that allows us to, or at least a majority of those services close by and available for individuals. We're not going to be able to find everyone, but those are some of the things. When we talk about infrastructure, and I'm speaking to my colleagues now, I think maybe some of us think of infrastructure as being steel and concrete. I think of infrastructure as families and a long, stable economic opportunity for our community, job creation. Those kind of things are an infrastructure that brings families and brings recreation and brings a commitment to community that maybe some of us fall short of imagining. But those are my comments. I have a list of many needs, but I just want the return on investment that we have at this particular time to be one of strong consideration. I might suggest that if we want to be very, I don't want to say selfish, but very single-minded in our particular districts, that we set aside a certain amount of money for each commissioner's district for a project of, or a few projects that we have, kind of like what we do with the casino grant funding. And it would be up to us to just stretch those dollars. Maybe it'd be 150,000 or $1 million in each district to determine how we want to spend it in our district. It may be something for consideration, but those are just a few of the things that I wanted to bring forward. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Burrough. Commissioner Bynum.
Thanks. I'll just circle back around. Commissioner Burrough had mentioned maybe an allocation, to commissioners, and I tend to resist that kind of thing. However, I will throw this out there. I had been thinking about this for a while as we look around at the community and the weeds that should be cut and the trash that should be picked up. And a thought that I had was possibly through ARPA, a very small allocation to each commissioner, and I'm talking maybe $5,000. But we use that to identify helpers like neighborhood groups or other organizations that would be willing to help us tackle some of these just very, very local block by block issues, like, you know, going along, trimming weeds off away from sidewalks. Give them a reward really for the work they've been doing for us for more than 20 years. So I did have that little thought in a very small scale way. Thanks.
Okay, before I summarize this, is there any other thoughts before I kind of walk through what I heard here as we kind of think through, you know, what this vision is and how we can kind of pull all your ideas together to kind of have a cohesive approach? Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you, Ashley. One of the things that I think would be very important for us is to get these dollars to turn over multiple times in our community. I would suggest that we do everything we can to hire local and buy local.
All right. (913) every day. Awesome. Excellent. Well, what I've tried to do here as I've been listening to you is to try to kind of roughly, and, you know, forgive me, there's a limit to this space, but obviously whatever I can do to kind of help organize all of these inputs here, I tried to kind of keep the kind of core values that I heard here. I recognize what you've heard in terms of wanting to foster a future that is diverse, accessible, and inclusive. So it is equitable for all community members, that we operate with transparency, but we take on bold actions that are transformational, modern, and creative. We are proactive in the way that we address the needs of our community by being more resilient and prepared for the future, building affordability for our community members, our residents, that focus on being safe and healthy. I think health came up quite a bit. But also that these solutions are sustainable and lasting. So going to the point of Commissioner Burrows about really understanding the return on investment of the work that we do so that we can make sure that we have as many impacts and benefits with every dollar invested as possible. But then also wanting to be focused, that was something that I heard quite a bit, that we really need to be able to kind of go in and address a problem, whether it's an immediate need, as Commissioner Walters raised, or within a specific neighborhood where we're benefiting and layering on the benefits of investments by the private sector and the neighborhood, as well as by our public dollar investments. So that's kind of generally the values that I heard from you. Obviously, it's going to have to get distilled down a little bit, but I think there's so much great input there that won't be too difficult. I think there's a lot of incredible information in there. And then what I did try to do here in terms of starting to understand what your vision for the future is try to roughly categorize kind of what you're kind of thinking about and kind of where the areas of opportunity really are for us moving forward. And I roughly categorize this in terms of kind of our health and well-being as a community, our overall quality of life, our infrastructure needs, kind of the backbone of our community and what it takes to kind of support the day-to-day life that we live here, whether you work here or go to school here or grow up here and age in place. And then as well, then the yellow is starting to kind of tease out some of the kind of the more operational changes that I'm hearing from you, whether it's thinking differently about how we work with the community, prioritizing higher local, buy local, but also that's going to that operational resiliency that Commissioner McKiernan raised at the very beginning of the discussion. As well as communications, which is something that Commissioner Markley specifically referenced. So really thinking not only what it looks like out in the community, but how we as an organization, the unified government, provides this type of response and enables this type of future, the vision that you've identified here. So there is a lot in here. And obviously, ARPA is limited. There's only so much that we can do with the dollars that come. But if we are intentional in the way that we prioritize kind of where we want to go from here, obviously some of those kind of multitude of benefits, that return on investment that Commissioner Burrows referenced, we start to be able to realize that more carefully because we start to see how it affects us in multiple places. So I'm going to pause here. Is there anything that you feel in that summary that I've kind of missed that you said tonight, or that you would like just to kind of underscore? Commissioner Johnson. Oh, sir, you're on mute.
I was waxing eloquent there.
It was fantastic, I'm sure.
To Commissioner Burrow's point about return on investment, I think that we have to be broad in our interpretation of what ROI looks like, because ROI may look different depending on what the need is and who the end user is, or who the end recipient of, whether it be funds or whatever the case may be, programs would be. Is everything is not going to automatically be defined in terms of dollars and cents. Now, I'm a dollars and cents kind of guy, but what my community tells me is that it's not always about the economic development, but what I hear from them, it is also about the human development that may not be as easy to define in terms of dollars and cents. And so I would just put that out there, because I totally agree with what he is saying. But how we interpret that may be different depending on the circumstances and situations. So thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, any last comment before I move forward? So try to keep all of these big ideas in your head as we kind of get to thinking through, okay, if that's what we want it to look like, if this is this inclusive, diverse, affordable community that works for everyone, that addresses our basic quality of life needs, but also improves our quality of life needs across generation, and that we've kind of got the base of infrastructure working and functional. The question is, okay, what are the goals? How do we understand what success looks like? So when we start to define goals, it can be really tricky. So very quickly, we often slip into defining strategies. So I just wanted to kind of quickly set kind of the framework for how we would define goals. So SMART is the acronym that a lot of people like to use because it helps guide goal development. It's about being specific, being clear in what you want to accomplish. So what is the outcome? What does it look like? It's measurable. So how can we quantify success? Now, it can be qualitative indicators. So kind of that, citizen satisfaction, what does the community feel, and how are they perceiving the changes that they see, but can also be very hard, fast indicators that are kind of numbers of, being able to address so many number of lane miles, for example, things like that. It's also attainable. Now, this is where we go from this big, audacious goal, vision of the future, to kind of more attainable kind of marks in time. So goals will continue to evolve over time. So this is really about kind of thinking about what do we need to do now, and how are we going to get there? And so therefore it should be relevant. This is building off of the commission priorities that you've already established, that you've used as the basis for your priority-based budgeting efforts within the organization, as well as understanding your overarching priorities as a commission. And then finally, these are time-oriented. So goals will continue to be kind of refreshed as you accomplish them. So we want to think about how can we get there, and how long will it take for us to get there with the type of resources that we have today, the capacity we have within our community, and potentially introducing alternative business models, as was discussed in terms of new public-private partnerships, other grant funding opportunities that we might get from the federal government and elsewhere, et cetera. Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you, Ashley. I just wanted to toss out one thing that fits the SMART goals of immediacy, and that is, number one, we have an existing community health improvement plan. It has working groups within it, the Safe and Affordable Housing Action Team being one of them. So make sure that we utilize, what we already have created and the partnerships that already exist. But my number one, as far as meeting all of the letters of the word SMART, is immediately assist with establishing a cold weather shelter. Winter is coming. And that fits every letter of your SMART goals there.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important, as Mr. Bach outlined at the onset, we are still in the midst of a pandemic. There are immediate needs that we did not necessarily fund with the immediate needs allocation that runs through the end of the year, but there will be, and we absolutely anticipate ongoing needs to address the global health crisis that we're still working through right now. So I think absolutely, I think we need to remember that there is that urgency. I think that's a very critical component. And I think as we establish goals, which is the next step in this discussion, I think really recognizing that and maybe teasing that out. Commissioner Bynum, do you want to take a stab at maybe defining a goal that we could use as kind of a starting point around addressing those immediate needs, that urgency of cold weather and the impacts it will have on our unhoused population?
I don't know. Help me with a little more info on what you're asking me to do.
So think about, so I think the goal would be something around, you recognize that we have a population that has very dire needs that we need to address. We have a pressing kind of timeline, so that immediacy of what you stated in terms of the weather. I think, how would you say we could tackle that? What does that look like in terms of how can we accomplish that? Thinking through,
sure,
by this time, we would like to have, a safety net, resource center or something put together to address X.
Sure.
In this homeless.
I guess I would say, through working with our partners who are already doing this work, we collectively will have identified a location that can immediately be utilized as a cold weather shelter. And some of us are working on this, but there is a budget that's been created and we need to fund it.
And we will continue to go back and refine and refine and refine. So just keep throwing out ideas. Commissioner Burrows, your hand was up.
Thank you. And I can't disagree with Commissioner Bynum's concerns. It's absolutely imperative. We just went through a budget process, and this was an issue that was brought up during the budget. But yet, as a commissioner, I have yet to hear that we have partnered with any one individual. I mean, I know we have our community groups and our neighborhood groups, but we could utilize community policing as a way to get out and make contact, and through the health department and through community activists, NRA, community groups, to find out those that are financially challenged and may be dealing with homelessness or very soon to deal with houselessness. But we have a number of vacant buildings in our community downtown that could be retrofitted and provide the services necessary, whether it be a warm place to stay, a place to shower, a place to bathe, a place to get services. We have the dollars to do that. And it may very well, we could get out in front of this instead of being reactive next year. I'm just really surprised that we haven't moved more rapidly in dealing with this issue, when for the last 2 years it's been a budget discussion as we've worked through those budgets. So that's just my comment. That warehouses that are vacant, we have the opportunity now to do what we need to do to divide those up, retrofit them, and start addressing our homelessness.
Excellent. And I apologize, I saw another hand raised. I don't see it now. Am I missing? Oh, Commissioner Ramirez, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Michael, it may not seem important or may not seem important at the moment, but it kind of ties into what I was talking about, increased accessibility, and kind of what Commissioner McKiernan was talking about, being prepared and ready for the next time this happens in our community. A goal that maybe that we can do is our departments review how they can provide more language accessibility to the information they provide to the community. And so I think that's a pretty good goal that we should have. We're again second most diverse community in this country, and next time we go through a pandemic, we need to make sure that we have that language accessibility for everybody in this community. So I think that's a goal that we should have, is departments reviewing what information they can translate or provide translation services to, so that everyone has that ability to get information that not just English speakers can get.
So I may have oversimplified this, and I think this is being prepared maybe as an organization for future disasters, and maybe it is community as well, because we do rely on a pretty extensive network of community partners to be prepared for the future and future disasters, big and small, by providing more universally accessible services. Does that kind of get to where you would like to go with that?
It does, but I'm more so language accessibility.
Well, and that I would encourage that might be a kind of a strategy, right? Providing, making sure that we're providing multilingual services, whether it's translation services on demand or kind of providing content or even our own website, making sure it's ADA accessible, for example. There's a lot of things that could be built into kind of how that would work. Is that okay? If I I'm not relegating it, but I just want to make sure, I'm just trying to be as inclusive at the goal level as possible, and also not being too prescriptive on terms of how we can do it, because there are many different ways that we could support this goal, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. And so what you have put down fits perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm going to recruit Commissioner McKiernan to help me wordsmith this, but I think we need to be intentional about how we allocate funding towards our stormwater rate. I don't know how to say this, but in such a way that it mitigates the volatility to our end users, to our constituents, in terms of the rate increases that they will ultimately have to reckon with.
So perhaps if to kind of try to package that all as a goal, is this about maybe establishing a clear plan moving forward in terms of how we fund our infrastructure to minimize the impact on our community year over year? Is
specific to stormwater,
specific
to that particular fee that is coming down the pike, and we need to make an intentional and immediate. This is my recommendation, that we need to make an intentional and immediate plan. We already have a plan in place, but I think that there's a level of volatility that comes along with that is going to affect certain parts of our community. And I want to make sure that I want to have one that will help to mitigate that volatility.
And I've heard stormwater come up a couple times. Commissioner Bynum, also you raised that point. Do we all generally agree that stormwater is an area of focus at this point across all of the kind of varying types of infrastructure that we've mentioned tonight? We've heard about sidewalks, parks, we've talked about streets, and as well as wastewater and stormwater.
I doubt that we will all agree.
Okay. Well, let's start here. We're going to put it down and we will kind of see how this evolves over the course of the next 30 minutes or so. Any other thoughts in terms of goals we should establish to realize this vision around our infrastructure, both social and physical, the way that we operate as an organization, as well as the overall quality of life? Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you, Ashley. I know we have these dollars available and we're on, I don't want to say a tight timeline, but that return on investments, the sooner we can start getting these dollars into action within the community, the quicker they start turning over. But we need to be prudent in where we expend those dollars. So I would just state to my colleagues that we all have multiple needs, and we represent, as has been stated this evening, a very diverse community. And with all those needs, the quicker we can get these dollars into action, the better for us and the better for our community. But first and foremost, I would state that if we can utilize any of these ARPA dollars to partner with additional grant dollars, we should strive to do that, to stretch that investment as far as we can, because that $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 could mean an additional enhancement to our community, whatever it may be. And that measuring that return on investment is going to be different to all of us, as it was stated earlier. But first and foremost, we all have an obligation to provide a responsive, respectful government. And if we can demonstrate that with this one-time opportunity, we will be successful in accomplishing what many communities may not be able to do. And that's the trust and the commitment of our community to know that their tax dollars, their health, their long-term viability for this community is at the forefront of how we are looking at reinvesting in our community.
Excellent. And I kind of made that a two-parter, partly because there's a little bit of a limitation in the software in terms of how many words I can put in there, Commissioner Burrows, but I did try to capture that urgency of moving the money out quickly so that we can also kind of find other resources to kind of maximize every dollar spent. Commissioner?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Ashley, for that. I know I laid a lot out there real quick, but we do have neighborhood organizations and partners that are waiting for us to make a decision and move forward. We want to be part of those. If we're going to have measurables, we need to hold them accountable and get those dollars out also.
Yes. Thank you very much. Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. I just want to state agreement with what Commissioner Burrows is saying about maximizing what we do have, possibly with, additional grant dollars. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think we did include some grant writing personnel in our immediate needs allocation, which was an excellent thing to do. But I want to support that. And I wonder if we should be capturing a goal around building out and strengthening our public health response and strengthening our communication abilities. Separately and together.
Yes. Yes.
Not only the communication abilities of our public health, but communication in general, and then definitely strengthening our public health system.
And the public health response that you mentioned at the onset, is that to the current pandemic or just kind of the overarching systemic issues that we're facing as a community?
To me, it's the overarching issues, which does obviously include this current pandemic, but certainly strengthening that well into the future. Because again, we have an adopted community health improvement plan that our public health department is leading. And so that is critical.
So is this an implementation of CHIP?
I mean, I think in part it is. But CHIP didn't account for a pandemic, so things are gonna happen.
Things are going to happen, yes. All right. Appreciate that. And then I will add one for okay. And then Commissioner Markley.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I am in transit, so I had to swap to my cell phone.
You're fine. I can hear you loud and
also
clear.
I had to leave behind my fancy sheet where I had my goals written out real nice with pretty language. So Ashley, I'll get those to you sometime. But
no problem.
Not just with stormwater, but I think with all of our infrastructure. Years is the end of my term. In 2 years, I'll look back. We did all the right ways. We looked at our buildings, we looked at our streets, we looked at our sidewalks, we looked at all of our infrastructure needs, our stormwater needs. We figured out what our priorities were, and we started to walk through infrastructure. So I gave myself a 2-year timeline, maybe partially because that's my term, but also I think it is a long-term project, and it's something we've started on, but I think it is something that needs to be stated expressly as a goal that over the next 2 years, we have got to get a handle on our infrastructure needs. And some of that I think should be right sizing, and some of that I think should be prioritizing. So prioritizing and right sizing all of our infrastructure, whether it's our streets or our buildings, our sidewalks, and then dealing with the stormwater problem. And I think we should be targeting these ARPA funds toward projects that can help us to do that.
Okay. All right. Well, oh darn, I think I just rewrote something by mistake. Hold on one second, make sure I get that.
Don't worry, it's recorded, right? So you can.
Yes, exactly. This is the advantage. And I know our clerk does an excellent job with transcription, so that makes it a lot easier for me. Commissioner Philbrook.
Okay, so here's a collaboration goal. The collaboration of the organizations and whether they be governmental, not-for-profit, or private, coming together for the housing needs for homelessness. And I would like to see them in a collaboration, in that conversation, talking, not just talking, but having something in place within 6 months to be able to work together, an understanding. And I don't want to get into legalities right now because that could get really complicated, but that would allow us to use private monies, all kinds of grant monies, as well as federal, state, you name it. That'll pull the monies together, and all of these organizations that work for that, they together have the knowledge on how to do that. So the collaboration, and that there's already collaborations out there, but I'm talking about Wyandotte County. And if we want to also get in the Greater Kansas City Coalition and Homelessness, because they're metro wide and they play in Wyandotte County, I want everybody at the table looking at this so we can get this taken care of. I don't want it rolled out one company, one group, I want it as a collaboration, because that's what it's going to take to bring it all together. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Commissioner Townsend, District 1. Wanted some clarification on what's up on the screen. There may be others who are looking in the public that have a question when we're addressing how do we get to this vision of the future. There are several tiles there that could be, their contents could be applied to any of the specific projects that were previously talked about. For instance, Commissioner Burroughs expressed desire to have whatever these ARPA funds are that would be allocated maximized by the use of grants, matching funds. So using that strategy, that could apply to any
Correct.
particular, okay.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
Sure, since all of the projects that were previously talked about past are not shown here, does that mean that if only these tiles are here, I'm hoping not, if you don't see a project here, that that's the end of the discussion on that? I'm seeing this question as really a methodology, even though there's some specific projects here discussed. I thought this was about methodology. Also, where was the one that Commissioner Johnson was talking about with stormwater? Let's see.
This one.
Being intentional in the planning and funding, that could be applicable to some of the other desired projects and goals. So I didn't want to get, I hope, you know, anyone listening out in the public would not be upset or get a clear understanding if we don't see a specific topic addressed here, that that's the end of that topic.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And I think Commissioner Townsend, you bring up a very strong point in that we will then kind of next kind of step once we've defined goals is to start to get into the strategies. So kind of how do we get there? And, you know, so addressing different aspects of our built environment, for example, thinking about different business models, whether it's thinking about new funds that we could create or alternative ways of granting monies to neighborhoods, as have been discussed. All of those are potential strategies that we could bring into play to meet these goals. So this is kind of the first page is really, if you want to think about it in terms of, that's the why. Why do we want to do all these things? Because we want an equitable, inclusive, sustainable, healthy community for the future. This is the what. What does that mean? What does that really kind of, how do we kind of know what that is when we see it? This starts to define that. Then the how is the strategies. And that's where we get into the particulars of specific programs, specific projects, different types of business models, different funding mechanisms, et cetera, to really help us with the realization of the kind of the what and the why.
Okay, one last question, and if it's premature, and this will be discussed later, tell me, but you know, the public's listening to us discuss projects and methodologies and all that. Would it be too premature at this point to ask, how much money are we actually talking about? Is that going to be part of this workshop, or that's for another time?
Definitely for another time, because we recognize that there have been some allocations out of the wholesale bucket, and I would imagine our chief financial officer may be on the phone, can give us the particulars, but the idea is to not get too specific in the dollar amounts this evening, because there are other opportunities, as we have been talking about. You know, there are other granting and funding opportunities we could potentially leverage. So we didn't want to be exclusive at this point by focusing too narrowly on the available funds, because we want to make sure that we really understand where you want us to go as a community, so that we can then get creative in those strategies, whether it's taking an ARPA dollar and leveraging that dollar with another federal grant, or a private partnership, et cetera.
Thank you.
And Mayor Alvey, I saw your hand up for a second. Did you want to say something?
Well, we're just kind of getting to the process piece. I think at this point, we're not really looking at specific projects. So I think there's a little bit of bleed into that. I think we're bleeding over into that a little bit. But I'm just concerned, you know, for instance, to try and put together a goal for, let's say, some of the priorities. For instance, how do we use these funds to leverage development in areas that have experienced disinvestment over the decades, that would help bring equity, help build wealth, But to be able to put that right now into kind of a SMART goal really takes more thought. So I think I'm a little bit confused about the process moving forward here, and that it's kind of hard to talk about a SMART goal without talking about a specific project, if that makes sense, or an area project. So even like, for instance, homelessness, providing our unhoused population with co-located resources needed for the upcoming winter. That's a very specific spend item that is valid, but it wasn't clear to me that that's actually where we were going with this.
And Mr. Mayor, you raised a key point, which is where we have that tenuous kind of relationship between goals and strategies, and they often get confused. This is somewhat of a strategy. I think within this, we can tease out the language for a goal, which would be to support our unhoused population by taking, immediate action, adding that time, by creating a network to support the needs of the community itself, through partnerships and the expertise of community organizations that are already doing this work. So I think there still is considerable unpacking that needs to be done to get to kind of the refined SMART goal language. And that is difficult to do in a virtual setting in real time. So I think what I'm hoping we can do is, if you can, through the course of the next 15 minutes or so, if we can just make sure that we understand kind of the big areas that we feel like this is something that we should target to work on. This is the, going from the why to the how is going to be something that's really, somewhat difficult to do in this context. So what I would encourage us to do is just make sure that we're capturing kind of the key areas that you think we need to focus in on. So for example, we've talked about affordability and one specific form of infrastructure. For example, we have not yet addressed housing, which was a very key area that we wanted to invest in, discussed in the last area when we talked about this vision for the future and having affordable housing and diverse neighborhoods with lots of sustainable options for the community. We don't have a goal yet to address that here. So I think we need to make sure that before the end of the conversation this evening, we do have something on the board that speaks to that. And what I would say in terms of the process itself, I would imagine that this will be the start of a conversation that we would like to bring forward and to a kind of, whether it's a working group or a task force that you had mentioned previously, or another way of kind of further distilling this to give even more direction to staff and our community partners that are eager and have been emailing us regularly, offering their support. This will help kind of guide some of those conversations around what are we even asking for. And so I would love to kind of make sure that we're not missing anything in these key buckets of goals. And then we'll definitely have to go back and do some refinement of this language to make sure it truly is a goal statement and not a strategy. And then we can start to define the kind of the different steps that we might take to realize that goal. So perhaps we should add a goal around housing affordability. Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you, Ashley. In listening to you talk, I'm sitting here thinking we have some neighborhood groups and community organizations that may have buildings already identified and may have grant opportunities that need the match. It may behoove us within the next 90 days for them to submit, and 90 days takes us into the very cold weather. Of course, we're up against a very tight timeline, but it would be up to staff and others to determine what that timeline might be. But we don't have to do all the work. We have an opportunity to provide the funding if there's opportunity there. And there's organizations out there that I'm sure have their thumb on the pulse of what it would take to address this homelessness issue. And as I've stated, we've discussed it, I know, for the last 2 budget cycles. And I'm assuming that there's groups out there that are ready to go, that are waiting for some kind of injection of support or dollars from us. So we might want to set a timeline to release. I don't want to say a certain amount because you stated earlier about allocating certain funds, but at least bring it to the table. Let us know what's available and what their vision is.
So this would, I think, as a goal is really about, it kind of brings in that value of collaboration. It recognizes that there is community capacity already and certainly a local expertise that we should be leveraging. So it really is about, making sure that we can work quickly to execute on things that have already been in the works. And that goes to maximizing that return on investment that we've been discussing so far this evening, that we're taking every single dollar that much further because we're kind of optimizing how it's spent from the very beginning. So I'm going to put this down here. I see Commissioner Philbrook, you have your hand raised as well.
Yes, to fill in on the rest of the housing conversation. Because, you guys already know I'm very bullish about the homelessness situation, but also the tiered housing that I'm speaking of, that we have appropriate right-sized housing for our community. Okay. And so how would we do that? I don't want to get into the how to, but how do you set a goal that says that you're going to evaluate and strategize at the the outcome for your community? Because you have to know, and I know we do, I'm sure we do, we have all this information,